This is Germany in the summer of 1945. Defeat in war, occupation, and division. Everywhere you look, there was complete devastation and poverty. The best minds of the nation were leaving, some to the US, while others were taken by the Soviet Union. The country was losing territories and factories, leaving behind enormous debts. But despite this miserable situation, Germany managed to rise again and become a global powerhouse. But how? Watch till the end to find out. These are the top 10 largest companies in Germany today. If you look closer, you'll realize that more than half of the companies are quite old, 100 years or older. For comparison, the USA's list has only one old-timer. These German companies dominate in manufacturing and are producing goods that people use every day. Cars, pharmaceuticals, trains, they have spanned from the 19th century until now. But how did Germany manage to stay so competitive? Throughout the 19th, 20th, and even the 21st century, Germany has always had one key element: state support. You've probably heard of Otto von Bismarck, this man right here. Besides unifying the German lands into a single empire and becoming its first chancellor, he introduced numerous laws that initially encouraged investments in German companies. Even in an agrarian and religious country, an industrial revolution was finally taking place. Entrepreneurs were building railroads, locomotives, and factories. However, when a crisis hit, Bismarck enforced custom barriers. But why? To prevent the death of local industry and ensure its continued growth. Foreign competitors would have otherwise devoured it. Another factor that has greatly attracted foreign investors to Germany is its workers. Germans were hardworking, obedient, and incredibly cheap. No civilized worker in the world would agree to switch places with a German. They worked harder for less pay and had coarser, cheaper food. For example, in Germany, a carpenter working 11 hours a day earned around 90 cents. In America, a carpenter typically earned $2.50 to $3 for an 8-hour shift. Now, before we go back to Germany after World War II, I want you to understand a very important thing. The country we're calling Germany is not actually all one. It can easily be divided into East and West, and not just because after World War II, Soviet forces occupied the eastern part and Americans the west. Look at the map of German firms and where they originate from. It's clear that the economic pulse always flows to the western and southern regions of Germany. But strangely enough, the political center is always in Berlin. And whether it was 150 years ago or today, the country operates on this principle. Western Germany earns the money, while Berlin taxes and sponsors Eastern Germany. You may ask, why do I need to know all this? Well, it explains how an economic miracle happened to devastate Germany after World War II. In 1945 and 1946, every second citizen of the country was jobless. Every third person couldn't afford their own coffin, and only every fifth child slept in their own bed. For instance, Cologne looked like this. Before the war, it was home to 750,000 people. Just after, Cologne housed only 32,000. But the problems weren't just about housing. It was all about money. People had the currency, Reichsmarks, physically, but could do nothing with them. The times got so absurd that cigarettes and eggs were more precious than money. And here comes another important man, Ludwig Erhard, the Minister of Economics and later Chancellor. He introduced a radical monetary reform. On June 21st, 1948, across the country, it was announced that Reichsmarks were no longer valid, but they could be exchanged for the new Deutsche Marks. The only thing was that each person could only receive up to 60 marks, 40 of them immediately and an additional 20 after a month. Also, whatever money was left could be exchanged for a 10-to-1 rate. Basically 10 Reichsmarks for 1 Deutsche Mark. Now, you may ask, why did Erhard do this? Remember when I told you that Western Germany was more industrially developed than the East? Do you also remember the photos of the destroyed cities, right? What about German factories? Do you think it suffered the same as the cities? As the war was ending, the British and Americans relentlessly bombed residential buildings and, quite openly, military factories where tanks and bombs were produced. Yet the rest of the German industry had barely suffered from these attacks. Only about 6.5% of the factories were destroyed. It turns out the industrial monster was ready for use. But how to do that when the currency isn't stable and people find it more profitable to get eggs and cigarettes instead of Reichsmarks? He initiated a strict but necessary reform and established a strong currency. After the reform, store shelves were filled with products, the economy revived, and the money supply was reduced by 93%. Germany once again becomes what it has always been, a country where you can produce almost anything of a high quality for cheap. The outcome? Since 1959, Germany has consistently been in the top 3 leading global exporters, so they produce and sell the most to other countries. You've probably heard that after World War I, Germany was burdened with hefty reparations. In other words, the country that lost the war has to pay its debts to the victors. However, Germany didn't pay their reparations as required due to economic challenges, political changes, and the outbreak of World War II. Now, how do you think the Americans dealt with the German debts after World War II? And these aren't small debts either. We're talking about 379 billion Reichsmarks. Well, they forgave it. It was a strategic decision to prevent communism from infiltrating West Germany. Later, the country turned into a true showcase of capitalism. There were 84 million Germans. Around 50 million were welcomed as workers by the western part. They fled the old regime and were willing to work for pennies just to avoid returning to East Germany. What works for Germany throughout all eras is its established approach to doing business. Their technology has always been at the top, thanks to the engineering and scientific excellence that is passed through generations. They have a skilled workforce, and nowadays it's not just Germans. Nationality doesn't matter, it's how their work approach is molded on this land. Unlike the late 19th century, modern German workers don't overwork. Based on 2022 data, the average German works only 1,340 hours yearly. That's less than in the US, UK, Mexico, or Canada. They spend half as much time working but produce many times more. For example, in the late 1990s, BMW opened its factories in the US and found that American workers didn't hold their responsibilities as strictly as the Germans did. And this is where the strengths and weaknesses of the Germans lie. Whenever the world falls into another chaos, they continue closing their eyes and working hard because there's order and a sense of duty. Sometimes it's relevant, like during the 2008 crisis when countries were drowning in debt, yet they were buying German machinery, technology, and cars. Still, sometimes their silence can bring world wars. So the order is good, but the silence, not really. Let's get back to the list of Germany's largest companies. Remember, I mentioned that there are many old-timers, but in the first place, it's still the one and only SAP. Companies in the IT sector are taking root in the country, both large corporations and small startups. Most of them are established in Berlin because it's cheaper than Frankfurt or Munich, yet it provides everything necessary for growth. There's always an abundance of investors willing to pour into various ideas. For instance, SoundCloud started in Berlin in 2007, and now there's a list of as many as 278 startups that are just beginning in Berlin. Let's look at Germany now, from ruins to one of the biggest powers in the world, and that's all because they had truly learned from their mistakes. Those harsh experiences shaped the country into one that's all about preventing conflicts, working with other nations, and valuing democracy. They're also really focused on recognizing and remembering the harm they did, so everyone remembers why peace matters. Even though things can be complicated, Germany's actions show that learning from history can make a country better and the world safer. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, write in the comments about which country should we make a following video.